Good morning and welcome, friends. Sunday is a special day for a lot of people because we all go to places to gather and obtain a spiritual incentive to enable us to go with our work through the week, month, year. All over the world, on Sundays, UL2 students gather and study the philosophy that was brought out by HPB, William Cohen Judge, R.C. and others. And its dissemination is extremely important all through the ages, including the 21st century. If we look around, we see that people are truly searching for spiritual pathways. It seems like the old style of learning, the old style of dissemination of truth, and the old style of study is not quite applicable to the 21st century. However, the books that were brought out in the 19th century are still as relevant today as they were then, because the truth explained in them is still the same. It never changes. It is brought out according to the time and place it is given to. And if we look historically, we can trace the path all the way to our historical beginnings. This lodge has a program on Sundays at 11 a.m. presented by a student of Theosophy. A topic is discussed, followed by question and answer session. On the first and third Sundays of the month, we also gather at 12:30 for the study of the Bhagavad Gita. The United Lodge is guided by its declaration. The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification in practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis, and it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. The following is the form signed by associates of the United Lodge of Theosophists. Being in sympathy with the purposes of this lodge, as set forth in its declaration, I hereby record my desire to be enrolled as an associate, it being understood that such association calls for no obligation on my part, other than that which I myself determine. Today's reading comes from the voice of the silence. The path is one disciple, yet in the end twofold. Marked are its stages by 4 and 7 portals. At one end, bliss immediate, and at the other, bliss deferred. Both out, or merit the reward. The choice is thine. The one becomes the two, the open and the secret. The first one leadeth to the goal, the second to self-immolation. When to the permanent is sacrificed the mutable, the prize is thine. The drop returneth whence it came. The open path leads to the changeless change, nirvana, the glorious estate of absoluteness, the bliss past human thought. Thus the first path is liberation. But the path the second is renunciation, and therefore called the path of woe. The sacred path leads the arhat to mental woe unspeakable, woe for the living dead, and helpless pity for the men of karmic sorrow. The fruit of karma, sages they are not still. For it is written, teach to eschew all causes, the ripple of effect as the great tidal wave, thou shalt let run its course. The open way, no sooner has thou reached its goal, will lead thee to reject the bodhisattvic body, and make thee enter the thrice glorious estate of Dharmakaya, which is oblivion of the world and men forever. The secret way leads also to paranirvanic bliss, but at the close of kalpas, without number, nirvanas gained and lost from boundless pity and compassion for the world of deluded mortals. But it is said, the last shall be the greatest. Samyak Sambuddha, the teacher of perfection, gave up his self for the salvation of the world by stopping at the threshold of nirvana, the pure state. Thou hast the knowledge now concerning the two ways. Thy time will come for choice, O thou old eager soul, when thou hast reached the end and passed the seven portals. Thy mind is clear. No more art thou entangled in delusive thoughts, for thou hast learned all. Unveiled stands truth, and looks thee sternly in the face. She says, sweet are the fruits of rest and liberation for the sake of the self, but sweeter are still the fruits of long and bitter duty. I, renunciation for the sake of others, of suffering fellow men. He who becomes Pratyakya Buddha makes his obeisance but to himself. The Bodhisattva who has won the battle, who holds the prize within his palm, yet says in his divine compassion, for others' sake, this great reward I yield, accomplishes the greater renunciation. A savior of the world is he. And now today's talk, the two spiritual paths.
Thank you. Greetings. Only a few in every century perceive the necessity of maintaining in their own lives the balance between knowledge and love, between head and heart. The great majority show an unbalance. Feelings alone, without the light of wisdom, predominate in one portion of the majority, while in the other, head learning, without soul wisdom, without compassion and philanthropy and sacrifice, works havoc. Religious feeling without knowledge is a curse which develops fanaticism, hatred, and war. Knowledge devoid of a spiritual basis soon develops into false knowledge, which begets arrogance, enmity, and war. Only a few, a small minority in any century, are esotericists, not inquirers, nominally interested in the occult, but real students learning to practice and to promulgate the grand doctrines of the science of life. Their task is to produce that balance between knowledge and ethics in their own constitution, without which there can be neither the gaining of enlightenment nor the practice of altruism for the good of all. For these few, H.P. Blavatsky produced a book called The Voice of the Silence, dedicating it to them. In the preface to that priceless little volume, she writes that she offers 3 fragments, and that more could not be given to a world too selfish and too much attached to objects of sense to be in any way prepared to receive such exalted ethics in the right spirit. Esoteric philosophy has always taught the art of all-round development, a healthy mind in a healthy body. But also, it has always taught that the course of unfoldment is from within, without, and that therefore mind and not body should be the starting point, and that motive and not method should receive primary consideration. Unfoldment from within, without, and the starting point should be mind, not body. Not that body and method were neglected, but ever and always mind and motive were made the starting point. This is the burden of the Gita, of the doctrines of the Buddha, of the teachings of Jesus. Like all occult treatises, the voice of the silence is written in a cipher, and yields more than one meaning, for there is more than one key to be used in deciphering a profound cipher. The neophyte at his stage, the adept at his, use the teachings for growth as for service, for growth through service. HPB has made a judicious selection for the few real mystics of the era to which she came, who recognized her and its worth. For students of the modern generation, the book has the same message and offers the same benefits. For them too, the formulation of the motive and the training of the mind form the first step. On the plane of motive, the student's attention is drawn from the beginning to the ideals of the higher life. Not entanglement in the world of matter through ambition and the like, but a withdrawal and a consequent complete emancipation from the universe of illusion, Maya, and its play, Vida. The student has to choose between the sense life and soul life, and when he's sufficiently confirmed in his higher desire to live as a soul, subduing the senses, he's presented with another, the grandest ideal humanity has ever known, renunciation. Soul culture leads the practitioner to the idea of liberation, a state so much desired by the afflicted, by hearts laden with sorrow, by heads full of confusion. Having seen the cause of disease, having drunk the potion of cure, who would want to continue the hospital life? Having recognized the world as a vast lunatic asylum, who would want to dwell therein and not run away from it? Even a little knowledge of Theosophy shows to the thoughtful and earnest student that this world is like unto a hospital, full of the ailing and the scrofulous, that men and women in their millions prostitute their minds and their hearts, that the world is full of moonstruck neurotics who rush about hither and thither, fancying themselves sane and sound. The Theosophical student registers that to be of this world is to seek disease, to prostitute powers, to become mad. Let me have none of these, he says. Thus, for more than one life, the student fixes his mind on liberation, and his motive in leading the higher life is to free himself from the world, the flesh, and the devil. The voice of the silence recognizes the place of the path of liberation, the conquest of nirvana. For many centuries, the ideal of liberation has inspired generations of mystics, and in India especially, the desire for moksha and to reach nirvana has become the supreme and the only goal of spiritual striving. However, the great Buddha taught the path of renunciation. and exemplified the teaching in his own life. Esoteric teachings claim that he renounced nirvana and gave up the Dharmakaya vesture, which means the glorified spiritual body, called the vesture of bliss, to remain a Buddha of compassion within reach of the miseries of the world. With the passing away of his pure teachings from the land of his birth, the concept of moksha prevailed in India as the sole ideal, submerging that of renunciation. Nowhere is the teaching of the path of renunciation so clearly formulated. Nowhere are its functions and objectives so profoundly contrasted with those of the other path as in the voice of the silence. One of the missions of HPB's incarnation was not only to point to this forgotten truth, but further to arouse in as many hearts as possible the aspiration to tread the path of renunciation. Therefore, among the only 3 fragments she gave to the public world is that of the 2 paths, and among the few must arise those who will undertake the culture of the heart necessary for the treading of that path. The attractions inherent in the ideal of renunciation are so powerful and so potent, as well as patent, that most among the few hastily say to themselves, "I will tread the path of renunciation." They overlook that special preparation is needed for that task, and that between the great service of the renouncers and the desire, however ardent, of the aspirant to love and to help his fellows, there's a difference, not only of degree, but of kind, of quality. To acquire the wisdom necessary for that path takes time and special effort, and this is possible through fellowship. Not as it's understood in the religious and mystical world, but as it's understood in occultism and esoteric philosophy. A special kind of training and development is necessary to walk the way of renunciation. It is the renouncing not only of the world of matter, but also of the world of spirit. Not of life in form only, but also of life eternal. It is freedom from the bondage of passion, which every emancipated soul enjoys, but further its acceptance of the bondage of compassion, which the mukta, or the one who's liberated, does not accept. So this path is renouncing world of matter and the world of spirit. Life in form and eternal. The training of the probationer includes the unfoldment of the right motive, which the ideal of the path of renunciation presents. Fellowship implies the treading of that path and the displacement of other motives, including that of liberation, by the one motive, the real inner motive of which all outer motives should be but expressions and emanations. The choice comes at the end, but that choice is the culmination of innumerable choices made by the soul, from the stage of the probationer to that of the adept. If we encourage in our mind the desire to renounce, if we nourish it that it may take root and grow, we will be getting the necessary training for acquiring the right motive. That training is not in mere resolve and verbal repetition of the famous pledge of Kuan Yin, but a remembrance of it during the performance of daily duties. To remind ourselves, this pledge is, never will I seek nor receive private, individual salvation. Never will I enter into final peace alone, but forever and everywhere will I live and strive for the redemption of every creature throughout the world from the bonds of conditioned existence. The great renouncer does not rush to help here, there, and everywhere, but ever protects and watches over humanity within karmic limits. This implies knowledge, especially of the law of cycles and the ultimate divisions of time. That is why HPV says that it's easy to become a theosophist, but it is quite another matter to put oneself upon the path which leads to the knowledge of what is good to do, as to the right discrimination of good from evil. The guiding principle in the probationer's life is discrimination between the real and the unreal. But these terms take on a special meaning for him, not the ordinary discrimination between soul and sense, between mind and matter, between beingness and being, but discrimination between selflessness and selfishness as ultimate cosmic principles. If he is bent on liberation, his discrimination follows one channel. If on renunciation, it cuts a different canal. In the former case, the neophyte's aspiration is for freedom from the world of erring humanity and entrance into the state of spiritual bliss. On the path of renunciation, his whole concern is with humanity, not with his own realization of bliss ineffable, but with bringing the bliss of enlightenment to the minds of men. The knowledge necessary for spiritual self-realization is limited, but that knowledge necessary for the service of other souls is vast and complex. Esoteric philosophy, advocating for its votaries the treading of the path of renunciation, requires that they obtain the latter knowledge. The first necessary step shown in the second fragment of the Voice of the Silence, the two paths, is that of the Buddhi Yoga of the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, with one important difference. It not only recommends seeking asylum in mental devotion and doing one's duty without caring for the fruits of action, but also adds gain siddhis, or powers, for thy future birth. This is from page 39 of the Voice of the Silence. Follow the wheel of life. Follow the wheel of duty to race and kin, to friend and foe, and close thy mind to pleasures as to pain. Exhaust the law of karmic retribution. Gain siddhis for thy future birth. To practice the most difficult art of doing good to others requires exceptional knowledge. It is not sufficient to gain deliverance of mind from thraldom by the cessation of sins and faults. Not cessation of sins, but something more. Not suppression of vice, but its elimination. The man who seeks and gains mukti not only abandons humanity, but leaves behind a particular set of his skandhas, which perforce must attract him back to incarnated existence, be it in another manvantara. Among the weaknesses and the conditions to be overcome by the future adept are not only desires for possession and power, but also duties which, however honorable, are still of the earthy. Here's a subtle difference in the evaluation of duty from that which is ordinarily made, a difference which the future renouncer has to note. The development of right renunciation at the early stages and for the probationer consists in the performance of duties, in not shirking them, but discharging them. In discharging them, however, he has to learn the lesson contained in the performance and develop the power which goes with that performance. In performing duties, we have to discharge them. Learn the lessons contained in them. And develop the power which goes with that performance. Liberation comes by the payment of our debts to all duties, but unless effort along a special line is made, the powers which follow that performance will not unfold in his consciousness, and the treading of the path of renunciation will be impossible. There are two kinds of siddhis, the one lower and psychic, the other higher and spiritual. So siddhis are powers. When the probationer is told, gain siddhis for thy future birth, it is the powers of the second type that are meant, powers belonging to buddhimanas. In the performance of duty, one should have not only detachment from the lower personal self, and from the results of actions, but also attachment to the higher egoic self, so that the field of dharmayagna, sacrificial service, widens. He who desires liberation discharges his duties in such a fashion as to create no new causes. Exhaustion of karma is his method. But he who aspires to tread the path of renunciation performs actions in such a manner as to create new opportunities to serve an increasing number of human minds. Each sacrificial action of his, naturally unfolding from his congenital duties, karma dharma, is like a pebble thrown in a lake. The circles of karma made by it grow and grow. But the aspirant is thrown back into his old sphere if, through lack of knowledge and because of limited perception, in serving he does not unfold the spiritual siddhis. Each sacrificial deed deepens the spiritual insight, provided that both in motive and in method it is according to the teachings of the esoteric philosophy. Occultism teaches how to turn the forces of evil to good, and unless the probationer on the path of renunciation learns this and thus gains siddhis, his success will be very distant. Therefore, this is said on page 28. To live and reap experience, the mind needs breadth and depth, and points to draw it towards the diamond soul. Seek not those points in Maya's realm, but soar beyond illusions. Search the eternal and the changeless Sat, mistrusting fancy's false suggestions. For mind is like a mirror. It gathers dust while it reflects. It needs the gentle breezes of soul wisdom to brush away the dust of our illusions. Seek, O beginner, to blend thy mind and soul. The ordinary man has for his horizon his street. His insight is surface deep, and the points of his magnetic compass draw him to his appetites. He lives in his sense-created state, which looks to him like a real world, but which is not any of the 7 worlds of rest eternal. His mind made subservient to his senses, and his senses to his appetites, he goes from death to death. The man who has begun to live, who recognizes that life being probationary, afflictions are opportunities, looks beyond his street. Modern education does give him some breadth of vision, but not the depth, and therefore the gap between his knowledge and his practice, between his mental and his moral life, between his sacred beliefs and his secular deeds. Theosophy educates the human mind to gain depth, to see below the surface, to penetrate into the very kernel of form. When the horizon of the student is broadened, when the insight of the practitioner has deepened, and therefore he has begun to live, he must secure the magnetic compass of the higher life. In navigation, by means of the magnetic compass, the directive force of Earth, the great magnet, upon a freely suspended needle, is used, and it is indispensable. Equally indispensable, nay more so, is the corresponding instrument to navigate the ocean of samsara. The depth of insight develops viveka, discrimination, and for the learning soul, that aspect of it which enables him to select ideas and aphorisms which, under karma and for his particular stage, are necessary. The points of his magnetic compass show him the way to Sat, truth. It is for the human mind to maintain the breadth and the depth gained by not allowing desires and fancies to exert their power of suggestion and to draw him away to Maya's realm. This has to be achieved by the mind blending itself with the soul. Daily, hourly, from the sphere of memory, the dust rises and settles on the mind, taking away its capacity to reflect the divine ideas of Akasha. Therefore, daily and hourly, the mirror of the mind has to be dusted, and study of the esoteric philosophy does it. Sustained effort to reflect divine ideas polishes the mind, transforming the mirror and giving it the superior capacity to reproduce more and more accurately the living images of devas and dhyanis, Buddhas and bodhisattvas. These reproductions are the real points that draw the cello soul to the Vajrasattva, the Lord of Mysteries. So we have to have sustained effort to reflect divine ideas. It is during the process of brushing away the dust of illusions, of blending mind and soul, of soaring into the sphere of Sat, that the choice to tread the path of renunciation is confirmed. Because we see the hidden meanings and the occult implications of that choice. The great choice comes at the end, when the knowledge concerning the two ways is obtained. Voice of the Silence says, "Thou hast the knowledge now concerning the two ways. Thy time will come for choice, O thou of eager soul. When thou hast reached the end and passed the 7 portals, thy mind is clear. No more art thou entangled in delusive thoughts, for thou hast learned all. Unveiled stands truth, and looks thee sternly in the face." She says, "Sweet are the fruits of rest and liberation for the sake of self, but sweeter still the fruits of long and bitter duty. Aye, renunciation for the sake of others, of suffering fellow men. He who becomes Pratyeka Buddha makes his obeisance but to his self, the Bodhisattva who has won the battle, who holds the prize within his palm, yet says in his divine compassion, 'For others' sake this great reward I yield,' accomplishes the greater renunciation. A savior of the world is he. Behold, the goal of bliss and the long path of woe are at the furthest end. Thou canst choose either, O aspirant to sorrow, throughout the coming cycles." The individual who chooses the path of liberation is described as a Pratyeka Buddha, a Buddha of selfishness. One who selects the path of renunciation is described as a Bodhisattva, a Buddha of compassion. The term literally means one whose essence is wisdom, or one of enlightened essence. The Buddhist sage Arya Sangha refers to Gautama Buddha as the supreme Nirmanakaya. HPV echoes his assertion, writing in a footnote that the esoteric school teaches that Gautama Buddha, with several of his arhats, is such a Nirmanakaya, higher than whom, on account of the great renunciation and sacrifice for mankind, there is none known. It has always been taught that the treading of the Bodhisattva path consists of 2 things. First, bodhicitta. Second, the perpetual practice of the paramitas. This is what the voice of the silence is referring to when it tells us that to live to benefit mankind is the first step. To practice the 6 glorious virtues is the second. Bodhicitta is the fixed inner and mental attitude or focus of compassion and altruism. This naturally leads to the putting into practice of the paramitas, which are variously translated as glorious virtues or transcendental perfections. Generally speaking, Mahayana Buddhism recognizes 6 paramitas only. In the esoteric system, as represented by the voice of the silence, 1 more is added and placed 4th in the order. Its position as the 4th of the 7 thus gives it the important significance of being the central paramita. And the paramitas are we learn from the voice of the silence that these are, first one is Dena, which is the key of charity and love immortal. Shila is the key of perfect harmony in word and act, the key that counterbalances the cause and the effect, and leaves no further room for karmic action. Shanti is patience sweet, which naught can ruffle. Vairagya is dispassion, detachment, desirelessness, indifference to pleasure and to pain, illusion conquered, truth alone perceived. As it was just mentioned, between the 2 triads is the paramita of viraga or vairagya, without which neither can maya illusion be conquered nor truth sat be perceived. Detachment, dispassion, indifference is in more than one sense the most important of the virtues. Virya is the dauntless energy which keeps pressing on towards the goal and fights its way to the supernal truth. Out of the mire of lies terrestrial. Dhyana is perfect inner contemplation and meditation. Its golden gate, once opened, leads the Narjo or adept toward the realm of Sat, eternal, and its ceaseless contemplation. Prajna is highest perception, perfect consciousness, supreme wisdom. It is the key to which makes of a man a god, creating him a bodhisattva, son of the Dhyanis. We're implored to practice the 6 glorious virtues, because those 6 lead us sooner or later, like gates of portals or portals, to the 7th, which is the great goal of all. It should be noted that the voice of the silence also occasionally mentions 10 paramitas, implying that there are an additional 3 beyond the 7, of which it specifically speaks. These 7 portals on the path are really 7 divisions or stages in the Antakarana, or Antaskarana, leading up to its very summit, where one re-becomes the God, the divine entity, the individuality which one truly is. It is It's important to take a moment to shed further light from the Theosophical glossary on Antakarana, since the term has various meanings, which differ with every school of philosophy and sect. Sankaracharya renders the word as understanding, others as the internal instrument, the soul formed by the thinking principle and egoism, whereas the occultists explain it as the path or bridge between the higher and the lower manas, the divine ego, and the personal soul of man. So it's the path or bridge. It serves as a medium of communication between the two and conveys from the lower to the higher ego all those personal impressions and thoughts of men which can, by their nature, be assimilated and stored by the undying entity, and be thus made immortal with it. These being the only elements of the evanescent personality that survive death and time. It thus stands to reason that only that which is noble, spiritual, and divine in man can testify in eternity to his having lived. Antakarana is formed by thought. The object of Theosophy is to give us a right basis for thinking, a true conception of what we are. As we think and act in accordance with this true conception, our thoughts form a channel or path between higher and lower manas. The effort from the lower sets up a corresponding influence in the higher towards it, tending to union between the lower can, by right thought, selflessness, and action, form the bridge which unites it to the higher. The cultivation of right motive takes more than one life. The control of the wandering mind is a necessity, universally recognized. But how many think of the wandering heart? When the heart has been steadied, concentration of mind becomes easy, for an objective has been found. The mind gathers itself together and makes the objective its center. But without a goal or an objective, the mind can never gain one-pointedness. Many and varied are men's objectives in life, and the student of Theosophy is no exception to the rule. If he determines his objective to be neither the bliss of nirvana nor the developing of siddhis, low or high, nor achieving success in this or that sphere, but letting everything go to tread the path of renunciation, disciplining himself for the life of spiritual service, of orphan humanity, then he has found the correct objective, the right motive essential for the life of chelaship. Once an aspirant resolves to follow the right motive, it, whether he remembers it or not, will affect his life and force him to work for humanity in one way or another. Directly he attempts to gain spiritual benefit, selfishly instead of trying to help his brothers, he will feel the inner call to work, which cannot be evaded. For the great choice, his time will come, but its coming will be hastened as he remains faithful to the great choice of his present incarnation, to endeavor to make Theosophy a living power in his life. This brings us to the end of our prepared remarks. The floor is now open to questions or comments.
Okay, the path of liberation, the path of renunciation. We eventually, if we keep trying to do the kinds of things you outlined, paramitas and so forth, we get to that decision point. So that's where we have the two paths, right?
Correct.
Up to that point, it's self-induced. Well, it's always self-induced.
It's always self-induced, self-devised.
Yeah.
And as we go along in this chelaship, there comes a point where we choose between the path of nirvana or the bodhisattva. And until
So
then...
for most of us, this is an immense period of time we're talking about.
Many lifetimes.
Yes, and I think Mr. Judge has a chart in there showing, approximation of time periods and so forth. But the idea is we need to think right every moment and every action, right?
Exactly, and since we're working on our manas principle, the mind principle right now, having the right thoughts are so important for the students, based on the students' understanding. So Theosophy is essential for humanity at this point.
You only mentioned motive and thinking. Now the action part, I mean, I think you might have mentioned action too, but that's not really emphasized in this philosophy, if I understand it correctly. Because if your motive is right and your thinking is right, you're eventually going to act right.
Right.
You might make a mistake today, but eventually you get to the point where you have perfect action.
Yes, and at the beginning we said it's from within, without. So, and also we said mind and not body should be the starting point. So if you don't have the right, correct thoughts, how can you perform right action? That's the emphasis here. Please.
But Mr. Judge says you have to pay attention to all the other lower qualities you have. You cannot just jump start it. He says that each sheath has to be appropriately dealt with. And he's talking about here your feelings, your emotions, and he says that if you don't address them and you allow them to remain, they will uproot your mind eventually. Because he says you have to address those, that all of your sheaths have to be considered.
Interesting.
Very
Well, maybe
interesting.
it's related to vairagya that we talked about, this detachment from
The end result.
of desires and passions. So maybe there's a slight nuance there.
But that to me is detachment from the end result. But I think that when you start doing the paramita path, they also tell you that you have to put it in a parabolic fashion. That if you start with dana, you're also addressing prajna. Because
Yep.
as you struggle with dana in your daily life, as you described it, prajna activates itself.
Yes.
It's an A at the end.
So if we put numbers for these, there's a chart. I didn't put it here, but it will be in the.
Prajna and dana go together.
So 1 through
and
7, right?
go
Yeah.
together.
So it's like this.
Yeah,
1, 2, 3, 4, which is vairagya, 5, 6, and 7.
yeah.
So
That's
you're
what-
saying these
Yeah,
correspond
so
together.
when you work, because they tell us to concern ourselves with the three, and that it automatically activates the other side as you're going along.
Yep.
Somewhere along the line, Mr. Judge says, you do have to, when you sit meditation, consider your lower mind first, because he says that's where the emotions and all the other lower qualities affect it. And without that, you cannot just jump start it to your higher mind. That antaskarana has to be voyaged, in other words, from the lower to the higher. But in another place, they say, when you're working with that, the higher self comes to your aid slowly as you're continuously, day by day, working with it. That you cannot, from the lower mind, to jump to the higher mind, that it's the other way around, that the thief has to be taken to heaven, is just that the statement that higher self is going to pull it up. It's not the other way around, because the energies of the lower mind cannot reach to the higher, because one is a spiritual, the other one is psychic.
Yes. Makes sense. Please.
I'd like to make a comment about something very concrete, and it's in regards to the renunciation of matter. And there are several movements of minimalism today in our society, and it's to get rid of what's not needed or extra things. You don't need to have duplicates of things, things like that. It depends on in which society you live. For example, in this society, it's like you acquire a lot of things. It's seen good because it's well, capitalism, you know. And I wonder, that's very material, right? that's part of the two spiritual paths that you mentioned. What would you say to those people practicing that minimalism, being involved in minimalism movements, what would you say to them in order for them to jump to also to the spiritual path?
I'd say it depends on why people are, first of all, doing that,
Why are
right?
they
We
doing
have to understand that and to understand their motive. And after that, I'd say hopefully they're doing it because they understand the temporary aspect of material things. And that's why they're letting it go. And I'm sure they're also feeling this sense of release and being more free. So you can abstract that to higher realms as well. And that's how you could become established in the spiritual path. But if you remember, we also said the renunciation is renouncing the world of spirit as well, and coming back to help humanity. So it's eventually, after many lifetimes, it will be that choice.
This movement wouldn't take you automatically to the spiritual path, right?
This what?
This movement, like to get rid of material possessions as much as you can,
Yes.
won't take you automatically to the spiritual path. You have to do something else.
Right. Yes. Based on this student's understanding, there's an Asian woman that spearheaded this, and I read that she's actually a spiritual person, and that's why she established her movement at least. So it is probable that there's spiritual motives behind some of the people who are leaders of this minimalist movement, and that's how everything starts. You know, there's a fountain, there's someone at the origin who has higher aspirations and higher wisdom that she shares with the rest, and people first imitate, and along the way they realize or discriminate and become established in the path. Please.
But perhaps that thing we were mentioning last week, simplification, comes out of that minimalization also. That the talk, this is student, so was that they were saying what you have, value it, but beyond that, it doesn't have any significance in your life. It's just there for you to use it appropriately, and that we don't need many of the same thing to use. And this guy was saying that he had only 7 shirts, 1 per each day of the week, and did not have anything else. And when he travels, he said, he just takes those with him, and he does not have to choose between, say, this color or the other. So to my mind, that's simplification. There's an article on Apollonius of Tyana, where it said at the beginning that he, in order to walk this path, had to give all of his possessions away. And at the beginning of the path, it says it's going to ask you, are you willing to give it away? And he gave half of his property, because he came from a very wealthy family who had founded the city of Tyana. He gave it to his brother, half of it, and the other half he distributed to the poor. So it is written everywhere that you have to lighten your burden as to what it is you're carrying with you in property, material things like the student has mentioned. So it has significance because it lightens yourself as
Absolutely.
you're giving it away. I think it helps you understand why you're doing it and what its purpose is. And the other thing they were saying was sustainability. That the way we're going about life is not sustainable. That we're, what's the word they use? Plundering Earth rather than wisely using the resources it offers.
I can make a comment on the beginning parts of what you said in regards to giving it away, but also valuing what you have left, quote unquote. That's sort of the middle path, right? We talk about the two extremes here, but you have to tread the middle path. And as you make choices, you probably you become more selfless and selfless and selfless, and you can, towards the end, you can dedicate yourself to humanity completely. But we cannot do that from the beginning.
Well, there are those who do. They just
Probably
have
they lived it in
awakening to that higher consciousness, and it's just like that. They become aware of it. Others, we have to walk the path very slowly. This outline.
I think they didn't become aware of it instantly. In prior lives, they had
Exactly,
developed.
exactly.
But there is that
themselves in
moment.
regard.
Yes. Things become clear and you embody it completely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Mr. Wadia was one of them. He came to HPB at age 18, and he devoted the rest of his life to it after reading The Secret Doctrine. It awakened something in him.
Yeah.
So it happens. But he did not ignore his family or his duty to everything in life, as you outlined it there.
You mentioned selfless, selfishness. We're all, especially in the Western world, tend to be very selfish. And it takes a lot of work to go from that to where we need to be. Or it gives us a lot of opportunities, if you will.
Absolutely. This student find it very important, and that's why I put it here. It's described as ultimate cosmic principles: selfishness and selflessness. And also, we mentioned freedom from the bondage of passion, but acceptance of bondage of compassion. So I think those are important concepts. Being selfless is not just in material things, but in actuality it's a cosmic principle. It has implications throughout the planes of existence.
But aren't you saying that at that stage you no longer have a personality because you have overcome it and you have become one with the all? You talked about Sakyamuni, Buddha. So at that stage your mind is universal. There is no such thing as personal.
Right.
It doesn't exist anymore. You become part of the all. You have become part of the logoic light. So I don't know what kind of consciousness that is, but HPB says not to compare it to the human consciousness that we have while we're in a physical body. It's very interesting, the things she tells us.
Absolutely.
But you also talked about the two paths, but they're not really separate. As you work and live, each day we make decisions. And she says somewhere that when you reach that moment where the decision making has to come into it, that you had already made your decision prior to it by your everyday activity and how you dealt with the duty that was presented to you. That we must not suppose that we can live life of, say, irresponsibility perhaps, and then when that moment comes for choice, you think you're going to make the right choice, but everything flows from what you have done previously. So that is something to think about, that this path is self-induced, self-devised, but at the same time, I think it is very particular. The Paramita path. And she also says it's an uphill road, this path. Sorry.
I was thinking, we deal with pairs of opposites a lot here, and I'm seeing maybe personality and individuality being that we think personality is very, very important when we're embodied. We've got to have a personality. But we are now one with nature. We're one with the all when we're at that individuality level. Right now in the personality phase, we're fighting it a lot.
One is your lower mind in conjunction with your emotions and all that. The other one is your higher mind in conjunction with Buddhi and Atman. So how could you possibly equate those two things?
When we're embodied, we have to have that sevenfold nature.
Well,
But
of course you do, but
if we have that higher three in the ascendancy, then those passions and desires and all those kind of fade away.
no, they don't.
They're
You have to work
overcome.
on them.
They're overcome.
You have to work on them.
Yeah, of course you do.
Your personality is your lower mind in conjunction with your passion, kama manas. The other one is buddhi manas, which is buddhi, your
Exactly.
discernment and wisdom in conjunction with your higher mind.
I think this is a good point to end our discussion. We'll continue after, but for now, we thank you and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.